Mexico, and welcome to our town hall today with Senator Udall. It's so great to be with all of you. And hello from Washington, D.C. I'm Carrie Campbell. I am the National Outreach Director for the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. Many of you I've had an opportunity to meet, and I'm so thrilled to be back here. I really do wish we were doing this in person. It's always great to come to New Mexico. I take every opportunity I can get to come to your beautiful state. But I am thankful that we can still come together via the Zoom platform or technologically at this unique time in our history. So we really are meeting at a time of really great, just a tumultuous time. And whether it's from healthcare issues, whether it's from economic issues, or whether it's from social inequality, my sincere hope is that you and your family and your loved ones are all staying safe and healthy at this time. And I'm really, really pleased that 100 of you from across the beautiful state of New Mexico are able to join us today to really have this important and timely conversation on America's role in the world during the midst of COVID-19 and why leading globally really matters locally, which we're seeing play out in front of our eyes every day. This is a really important conversation, and we're certainly honored to have Senator Tom Udall join us later today. He's back in the Zoom room. We will bring him out live in the next couple of minutes. But first, I just want to take a minute. For those of you who might not be familiar with the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, I want to introduce who we are as an organization. We are thrilled to be celebrating 25 years of building a better, safer world. We are over 500 American businesses and humanitarian organizations in conjunction with our network across the country of business leaders, faith leaders, military leaders, and community leaders, including from all across the country. We have our bipartisan National Advisory Council, which is chaired by Secretary Colin Powell, and is really made up of the nation's top national security and foreign policy experts, including most every living former Secretary of State. Additionally, we have our National Security Advisory Council, co-chaired by Admiral James Stavridis and General Anthony Zinni, and it's comprised of over 300 retired generals and flag officers. And they are working also with what we call our Veterans for Smart Power initiative. It's over 30,000 veterans from around the country who really are true believers and are committed to strengthening America's tools of non-military tools of our leadership. And what brings all of these diverse and unique voices together is our firm belief and understanding that we are living in a growing, interconnected world, and that America must be engaged globally to advance our own interests back here at home. So we talk about the international affairs budget. And that's that one tiny 1% of the federal budget that is the most cost-effective and powerful investment that America can make. It's sometimes called, and you may have heard it referred to, the foreign aid budget or foreign assistance budget, but it truly is so much more than that. It's our diplomats and our embassies around the world and support for our key allies. It's our efforts to tackle global health threats, such as the one we're living through right now, humanitarian disasters, and impacts of climate change and address the root causes of terrorism. It's our work to combat corruption, to promote the rule of law, advance democracy, and universal rights and freedoms around the globe. And it's our programs that open new markets for American goods and services, and public-private partnerships that offer a hand up, not a handout, to the most vulnerable around the world. It's effective, it's accountable, it's transparent, and after today's conversation, you will see that it works for you and me and the rest of the American people. So we host forums like this all around the country, and what we have found is that across political spectrums, across state lines, Americans like you really want to be engaged and they want to be involved. You know, COVID-19 has really underscored in a very tragic way the importance of this fight. And we are really, really fortunate to be joined today by an expert in the Senate to help us think through these issues and talk through these issues. Later on, we're also going to be joined by a great friend and part of our National Security Advisory Council member, Lieutenant General Norman Seip. We'll do that a little later in the program. But first, let me take this moment to introduce a man who needs no introduction to all of you, Senator Tom Udall. Senator Udall has been hard at work to address COVID-19 over the past months and really working to keep New Mexicans and Americans at large safe. He serves on the Foreign Relations Committee, where he has been a steadfast champion for our development and diplomatic programs. And for that, Senator, we thank you. And we were thrilled to host Senator Udall almost a year ago to the day. In 2 days, it will be 3 years ago, on August 14th of 2017. I was honored to be a part of that conversation and really glad to be back and have this full circle conversation. And I'm just amazed at how things have changed in the span of 3 short years. As everyone here knows, Senator Udall is retiring at the end of this year. And Senator, you will be sorely missed by USGLC and by the foreign policy community, but also by your constituents that are joining us here today and the rest of our New Mexico Advisory Committee members. So with that, Senator, I want to turn it over to you. And let's start off with an easy question. How are you? And how's your family?
Yeah, Carrie, my family, my daughter and my son-in-law, everybody is doing just fine.
Great.
This is as you've indicated, Carrie, this is a really tough time for everyone. And our hearts go out to the approximately 164,000 people in our country who have lost their lives. And we're losing more than 1,000 people a day. You know, this is a serious crisis. So I love this organization. It does such good work. And so I really look forward to our hour together here.
Great. Well, thank you. And so with that, I don't know if you want to provide some opening remarks, sort of set the stage prior to our conversation.
I would Great. Very much. So thank you for the introduction. And I'm honored to be here today and to take the virtual stage with Lieutenant General Seip. I'd like to first applaud the work of the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. In this era of great challenge for our nation and for the world, we need USGLC more than ever. USGLC is one of the strongest nonpartisan forums for development and democracy around the world. Unfortunately, over the years, Congress has more often than not abdicated its foreign policy responsibilities has instead used foreign policy as a partisan cudgel. Too often, Congress has shied away from the toughest decisions and allowed presidential power, both Democratic and Republican, to grow unchecked as a result. As James Madison wrote, and I'm quoting here, "War is among the most dangerous of all enemies to liberty, and the executive is the most favored by it of all the branches of power." And that's why during my time in office, I've worked to recenter Congress's constitutional role in these debates over war, peace, and diplomacy. And I've worked to advance a foreign policy that sees war as a last resort and puts diplomacy and peaceful international engagement first. The need for robust international engagement has never been more clear than it is now as we face down the COVID-19 global pandemic. This pandemic has taken more lives around the world than we've seen in a century. And it's devastated the world's economy, a global economy that is far more connected and interdependent than any point in history. Unfortunately, instead of taking a leadership role, the United States, once the envy of the world in public health, now has one of the highest death rates per 100,000 population in the world. We continue to have one of the highest rates of cases over the last 14 days. We haven't had a national strategy to beat the virus. This is unacceptable. Given our tremendous resources and wealth, the U.S. should be leading the world tackling this pandemic. But instead of leading the global effort, we are retreating from the world stage. We've withdrawn from the World Health Organization. We've attempted to distract from our failure by bullying friends and foes alike with the threat of sanctions and other punitive measures, as well as a threat of a second Cold War with China. I'm very worried about those who would use this pandemic for political purposes to increase tensions through racist rhetoric over use of sanctions and belligerent threats towards China. The option of diplomatic engagement with China and the world is much harder than the isolationist American first policy of this administration, but I really believe it's the right path. Stepping back from international cooperation and diplomacy, including withdrawing from the Paris Agreement and the Iran nuclear agreement, is counterproductive and cedes our position of leadership around the world. The United States has fallen from its position as leader of liberal democracy by alienating our longtime allies and failing to uphold at home the values we espouse. As we retreat from the international community and from diplomacy, we continue to be embroiled in wars around the world, wars that are taking American lives, and as Madison feared, further empowering the executive branch. Wars that have cost trillions of taxpayer dollars and that often catalyze, not counter, the very interests we are working against. And wars like our invasion of Syria and bombing of Libya, Congress has never authorized, even under the Constitution, only Congress, and everybody knows this, under the Constitution, only Congress has the power to declare war. But we need to bring that home as a reality. There is growing bipartisan support for reclaiming Congress's constitutional role in these matters, but the Senate and House of Representatives have voted to end the U.S. military support for Saudi Arabia's slaughter in Yemen. We have come perilously close to spiraling towards a war against Iran, and both chambers have voted to prevent the president from starting a war with Iran without congressional authorization. While the president vetoed both those resolutions, Congress made its views known. And there is bipartisan support for my bill that responsibly takes our troops out of Afghanistan, the longest war in American history. Recently, a foreign policy expert respected on both sides of the aisle left us. Former National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft opposed the Iraq War, warning us, and this is a quote from him, "Historically, the world has always given us the benefit of doubt because it believed we meant well. It no longer does. It's easy to lose trust because it takes a lot of work to gain it. Can the sense of confidence in us be restored? Sure, but not easily," end quote. To regain that trust, we must start by ending these endless wars and restoring our fundamental values here at home. As George Kennan wrote in his long telegram, every attempt to solve our internal problems and improve the community spirit of our own people is worth, and this is his quote, 1,000 diplomatic notes and joint communiques. If the United States of America is to remain a bright, shining city on the hill, it must renew its democratic promise, treat our allies as partners, and elevate diplomacy over militarism. Secretary James Mattis said it best when he said, "If you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition." And as Madison and the founders warned, this is a slippery slope towards an empowered executive and an authoritarian government here at home. We need to articulate a coherent foreign policy, not a foreign policy that meets the political needs of the 24-hour news cycle. We need to rebuild our trust among our allies and strengthen our engagement with the international community. We can start by rejoining the Paris Agreement and strengthening our commitment to global health. While our credibility and stature around the world has taken a beating, I believe we can regain our position. But as Brent Scowcroft said, We have a lot of hard work ahead of us. Thank you, and those are my opening remarks, and I'm looking forward to the conversation and discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. That truly was a scene setter for us, and we can see your expertise from serving on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and so you brought in so many different components there. So I want to start today's conversation around COVID-19 and America's role in the world and the global response that so we don't need to just be addressing this here at home, but we also need to be addressing it abroad, and how that impacts our interests and our values, both to New Mexico and to Americans at large. We're going to tackle some other critical international issues, some of those that you mentioned. You mentioned too many for us to take in right now, but both on the national security and both on the economic side of things. And then we're going to turn it to your voters, the folks in New Mexico. They pre-submitted some questions, and so they'll get an opportunity to ask you questions as well. So let me start off with the first question. And before I ask the question, I want to play a clip for you and then come back and get your reaction to it.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. Now, part of the reason for this is that we have invested a huge amount in nuclear deterrence, but we've actually invested very little in a system to stop an epidemic. We're not ready for the next epidemic.
Wow, that was Bill Gates 5 years ago saying that we're not ready for the next epidemic, and I think, or pandemic, and I think that we see that playing out here. In fact, when you look around the globe, 70% of the world is not prepared to address this or any other pandemic. And you know, as well as I do, it takes 36 hours for a virus to travel the globe, and the devastation that can be caused in such a short period of time. And thinking about this, keeping this in mind, you actually co-sponsored a bipartisan piece of legislation that supports border communities between the US and Mexico to coordinate their efforts in dealing with COVID-19. And I would like to ask you to talk about that, why you did that, and why that matters to New Mexico and what that means broader for our country.
You bet. Well, first of all, border cooperation has a good history here in New Mexico and with other border states. And one of the things we've seen is on the law enforcement front. I did that as a state attorney general, and on the public health front, we have a long history, and we have organizations that actually work back and forth across the border. And so I thought when it came to the pandemic, we needed to remember that those organizations need additional help because of the crisis we're in with the pandemic. And so I tried to work across the aisle and try to find senators who were willing along the border to say, let's move forward with the cooperation so we can tamp down the fear. Carrie, the thing I worry most about in this era is that political leaders can really focus on fear rather than focus on the cooperation and settling things down and moving us forward. So that border cooperation is tremendously important. And then just as a final note, let's never forget, in New Mexico, we have this great trans-border working where we have companies on one side that work with companies on the other. They put products together, both companies, and then these products circulate throughout the world. And so for New Mexico, this is probably the most vibrant economy for us in our state, is right down there on the border. And we want to protect that. We want both sides to have jobs. We want both sides to have stability and people to have productive employment.
So with this, I want to bring in our second panelist, General Norman Seip. General Seip served in the Air Force for 35 years and was commander of Air Force Southern before retiring in 2009. General, thank you so much for your service. Your career in the Air Force has taken you all around the world, from Iraq to the Horn of Africa to right here in our neighbors in Latin America. And today you are a great friend to USGLC, part of our National Security Advisory Council. So thank you for joining us and lending your expertise. So let me turn to you with this question about COVID-19. We certainly see it playing out that it is a health crisis, and it's one that we need to address, and as Senator Udall was just talking about. But it also has other implications for national security. And, you know, when I just read a report that in sub-Saharan Africa, violent attacks are on the rise by 37% in the span of 1 month, from March to April. And these are places that were already being challenged prior to COVID, and it's just elevating these challenges. So when you think about the national security implications of coronavirus, what are you most worried about? What concerns you the most?
Well, thanks, Carrie. It's a pleasure to be there. And hello, New Mexico. Senator, great to see you, sir. I remember meeting you after you had come into the Senate. I was down at Holloman Air Force Base, and then later on at Cannon Air Force Base. We had a chance to discuss the issues there. On behalf of all of the folks that are listening in today, please accept my thanks for your unselfish public service over the decades. You have truly put a legacy in place. Based on your comments, I have a feeling that you will not walk across the finish line here in November. You will sprint across that finish line, and I expect nothing different from you based on your enthusiasm for foreign affairs, the international affairs budget. Carrie, getting after your question, short term, and I'll have my uniform on as I answer this question. Short term, I worry about the fact that there's near peer and there's peer competitors out there. There's still the lone wolves. There's still violent extremist organizations and cells out there, and they're watching us. They're watching many countries as far as we pull inward and look at our problems from the pandemic. And I worry that one of these organizations, one of these cells, one of these countries may grossly miscalculate or mislead themselves into thinking that we can't do two things at once. That we can't react to events around the world while we deal with our own problems internally. And of course, when someone tries to take advantage of us, we're going to respond because we're able to do more than one thing at once. But now we're on that road of conflict, as the Senator talked about. A conflict that we wish we could have avoided through diplomacy and development and all that goes with it. Long term, I worry about the fact that all the work that we have done, when I say we, I mean a whole of government, across the world out there, helping to stabilize the weak and fragile states, stem the tide of extremism by promoting health programs, security, economic opportunities. I worry as those things now are on us, almost on a full stop, how quickly we can start them up again. And how do we get the traction back, and how do we get ourselves back to where we were before this pandemic occurred in order to help assist those countries, assist those organizations to help themselves, to solve their problems right there at the source there, and grow their economies, grow their health, their well-being there, so they can be part of the global economy, the global world out there.
Thank you so much for that. And you alluded to something about turning inwards and the risks of us turning inwards. So Senator Udall, I'm going to ask you a little bit about that in the national security space, but not only with the focus of COVID-19, it's thinking about climate change. And 2020 is likely to be a record-breaking year, whether it be from extreme weather from the hurricanes that are already forming in the Atlantic, or whether it be the mega drought that New Mexicans are facing right now and having to deal with. So you actually call climate change an existential threat. So when you look at the shared threat of climate change and COVID-19, what's the urgent need for a global response to address climate change?
That's an excellent question, and let me first just thank Lieutenant General Seip for those very strong and powerful words. I think when we look at both climate change as an existential crisis, and we look at the pandemic and how I heard one person say how this is pretty dramatic in the world, how one person can bite into a bat in China, in Wuhan, China, and it shuts the whole world down. That's pretty dramatic in terms of how viruses spread and the impact they have. And as we encroach more and more on nature, one of the things that happens, we're going to see more of these zoonotic diseases, diseases that move from animals into human beings. But the central question that you're really asking is the question of how do we tackle these? We can do everything perfect in the United States of America on climate change, on the pandemic, and it's not going to move the world forward and the planet that we live on or save our planet. And so this cooperation, collaboration, being a part of international organizations, being a leader in terms of international organizations. We're the richest country in the world, so we give a little extra. I don't think we should send a message that we don't like your organization, we're going to take our money away. We should send a message, your organizations can do better and we'll help you with reform. And so I really believe that we've got to turn away from this idea that we're going to be isolationists. But I want to also emphasize that we have some big things that we need to tackle in the United States: the inequality, the environmental injustice, the racism that we're seeing with the Black Lives Matter movement and what they're pushing and what they want to happen. And unless we keep our country strong, then I don't think we're going to have the ability to be much stronger and powerful on the international stage. And so there's a fine balance there. And so some of my words you heard earlier were saying we've got to be mindful of tackling the problems here and be a shining example. And we also have to be engaged. We shouldn't turn our backs on the world because we all have to work together on these big world problems like pandemics and like climate change.
So you mentioned China, and General Seip, you mentioned China earlier. So I'm going to ask a switch to an economic question about China. General Seip, you spent some time at Southcom, so you know very, very well how China has ramped up its economic engagement around the globe, in Africa, but also in Latin America. And what's concerning is that China has now surpassed the US as Brazil's #1 trading partner. And now we see China expanding their engagement and pushing to other countries even more with their assistance with the pandemic. So my question to you is, what are the costs or what are the dangers that you see in ceding ground to competitors, not just China, but like China? And how do we demonstrate to these other countries that we would make the best partner to work with those countries?
Well, you know, when you cede ground as a military man, it's a lot easier to get it back with military power and might. When you cede ground, though, when you're talking about economic development, diplomacy, things that China is doing in the case of South America, that's a much more difficult challenge as far as bringing that back to you, putting you back in the lead, putting you back in the driver's seat there. Especially when your competition is handing out money, lock, stock, and barrel, to satisfy the immediate needs of those countries, regardless of what the long-term disastrous consequences that we've seen around the world when China's decided to call in its loans or make due on some of the promises that were made by governments in order to get some of the aid and assistance that China had to offer there. So the long-term consequences that we have is something that they don't worry about, that we need to. When you talk about the ceding power, you know, when Senator Udall and I were growing up, you could have voids. You could come into South and Central America, you could build a church, you could build a school, a clinic, you put up a plaque, you could high five everybody, you could walk out the door and not come back for 2 or 3 years and be welcomed back with open arms. And not the case today. When there's a void out there, it's being filled, and probably rightly so. So for us, we need to be careful, and we need to be picking and choosing the voids we're willing to let go somewhere else. To get into your second question, how do we demonstrate to being a better partner? I'll state the obvious, that diplomacy and development, they entail coordination with the defense, and it's not a spectator sport. In better terms, it's a full contact sport. You've got to be there physically, not virtually. You've got to be present in that country, in that region, in that city, or in that village continuously. We talk about, 90% of life is showing up. I would submit to you 90% of diplomacy and development is being there with the operative word continuously. Now, can we do that for every single country in the world? Absolutely not. But as our leadership and our government decides what regions, what countries are important to us there, we need to be there with our A-team, with a plan that's coordinated in collaboration with a country, with a region, and we need to follow through. And we need to think through not just our short-term goals, but the long-term goals there. Because I would submit to you that there's countries out there that are waiting to fall on our shortcomings there. So again, ceding ground to the Chinese or any other near peer out there is difficult to take back. Making ourselves or demonstrating ourselves as solid partners out there. It's communication, as the senator said, it's collaboration, it's cooperation, it's coordination, the 4 C's there. And it's got to be done in conjunction with each one of those countries, with our USAID partners, with our profit, nonprofit, with our NGOs. It's got to be a full team effort in order to hold on to those areas that we think are important to be involved with and that we can bring assistance to.
Thank you so much for that. And we are running a little behind on time, so I'm going to switch from the economy to humanitarian values question. And look, we know that we have unprecedented crises. We've been talking about them, and there's so much more we haven't even touched on. And it's only been exacerbated by this pandemic. So we've been talking about that development and diplomacy are the smart thing to do. It's a matter of our national security. It's a matter of our economic interests, but it also is the right thing to do. It's who we are as Americans. It's our values. It's sharing who we think we are and we know ourselves to be. So to highlight the importance of America's humanitarian leadership, I want to welcome Ambassador Delano Lewis, the former U.S. ambassador to South Africa, who's really seen firsthand the transformational power of foreign assistance.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I must say I'm very pleased to be on the platform with Senator Udall and General Seip. This is a real pleasure for me. I'm traveling, heading back to Las Cruces, but I wanted to be a part of this very important engagement today. Diplomacy is really the key. And if we're going to start with our leadership at home and abroad, we must fund the State Department fully. We must fund our diplomats, give them the kind of resources and tools that they need to continue with their diplomatic efforts. We should continue to fund the United States Peace Corps. I was a Peace Corps staff in Nigeria and Uganda in the 60s. I had a granddaughter who just returned from Indonesia, and now all volunteers have been evacuated because of the pandemic. The question is, what is the U.S. going to do going forward? Are we going to keep those volunteers doing their efforts about peace around the world? But diplomacy is the key, and I certainly believe that our administration going forward should fully support our efforts, our diplomatic efforts abroad. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lewis, and thank you so much for your service to this country, both as a diplomat and in the Peace Corps. So with that, Senator Udall, I'm going to turn to you. We were talking broadly about diplomacy and development, but I want to bring it narrowed down just a little bit to Latin America. And there are some statistics that say the region of Latin America could see as many as 45 million COVID cases if we don't have some international assistance to help those countries. And what we know is likely to happen from that is migration. And so this forced migration that will come as a surge, or the surge of forced migration that will come, that the declining remittance is coming to those countries, they're not able to address this pandemic. So I know that this is of interest to you, given the legislation you co-sponsored. So I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about, as a border state, how you understand the importance of the ties to our Southern Hemisphere and our response internationally, particularly in Latin America, and what that means to New Mexico and the country at large.
You bet. First of all, just a little bit of history about the Southwest. You know, when the whole country was connected, when the Southwest was connected to the country, it was in the 1880s when the railroads came in. And so 250 years before that, and probably many, many years before, our sole contact and reliance here in New Mexico and other states in the region was to the south. And we had significant ties, we had significant trade. It was back and forth. And it was something that's very deep in us as a people, understanding that they are very close to us and they've been a part of our history. So I don't think there's any doubt. And the second point I'd like to make, and then drill down a little bit, is that we're a country of immigrants, and we should never forget that. And immigration helps us in terms of our strength. We're the immigrant populations that have moved to America since it started have been incredible in terms of the contribution they make, the vibrancy they make to our economy. And so we need to remember all of that when we approach the idea of a neighbor going off the charts on a pandemic. And so that border cooperation we talked about earlier, tremendously important, and then extend it further to the south. So I think we've done in certain circumstances some of that, but we have a little bit too much in terms of saber rattling and not trying to get some of these countries working with us, making sure they're not going to be the world's leader in terms of pandemic numbers. And that's why you invest and are a partner in the World Health Organization. That's why you're a robust partner in the United Nations, and why you're a robust partner in all the Organization of American States and all the other regional entities that are a part. I remember when President Obama, after many years, was one of the first presidents to go down and open up his approach to countries in South America and Latin America. So that's the approach I think we need, and I think it's very important that you raise that.
Well, thank you for that. I do want to make sure we get some of your voters' questions in. So we're going to turn to that part of the program. So I want to call Debbie Moore to come on video and ask your question.
Good afternoon, Senator. Nice to see you. Good afternoon,
Hello,
General.
Debbie. Good to
How
see
are you, sir?
It's great.
Debbie Moore, President and CEO of the Greater Las Cruces Chamber of Commerce, and also the President of the State Chamber Association. So I'm kind of twofold here. But as you know, that the pandemic has certainly set back decades of development progress around the globe. And for the first time in 30 years, we're going to see that potentially decrease in the measurements of health, education, and income. So I throw this out. What are you most worried about as we look at the millions across the globe that are suffering? And I know a business in the United States is suffering just like a business in a foreign country. And then how can additional investments in development and foreign assistance maybe help mitigate these setbacks?
Yeah, well, the first part of your question, and we've talked some about this, but it's important to reiterate it in terms of the pandemic, is we all need to tackle this as countries in the world working on it together. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And we're seeing a failing there in some circumstances, especially the United States not being a part of the World Health Organization. And the next thing we need to go, that goes to the second part of your question there, is we should be engaged around the world. We should be, as the ambassador, and I think General Seip also said, we need to be on the ground. That's what our foreign service is so good with. They're there, they learn the culture, they're career people. These are people that are such a resource, and it is so hurt me when I've seen recent secretaries of state belittle our career foreign service people that have served all their lives developing expertise in various areas of the world. And so we need to keep investing on that. We need to have people on the ground. We need to make sure that USAID is there in partnership. And what I'm really talking about in the broadest possible context is soft power. We're not utilizing the great tools we have in terms of soft power. And that can move us a lot more forward in a very positive way than sometimes resorting first of all to military. And this isn't in any way, and General Seip knows we've had lots of discussions, we have the best military in the world. They're equipped, they're great warriors. They go out and do the task when we give it to them, and there's nobody that they can't take on. But they should be utilized in those circumstances and not been put in situations where they have to do everything. They have to nation build, they have to handhold, they have to become local law enforcement officers. That should be done working in cooperation with regional organizations and others who really know what's going on there. So Debbie, that's a great question. And thank you for being a great part of this organization, and look forward to seeing you sometime in person down there in Las Cruces.
Thank you.
Debbie, thank you so much. And so next, who submitted a question is Deborah Inman.
Good afternoon, Senator. How are you doing, sir?
Hello, just great, Deborah. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So my name is Deborah Inman. I'm the Senior Vice President of Business Development for Albuquerque Economic Development. And I really have a question around partnerships. So US and New Mexico companies, obviously, I think will be very critical partners in combating COVID-19, as the private sector's resource, expertise, and technology will complement the work that is being done by governments and multilateral organizations, especially when it comes to producing PPE and developing a vaccine. So I actually have two questions. First, how do these partnerships leverage the strengths of both the public and private sector and make our efforts to tackle challenges like COVID-19 even more effective? And then also, how can New Mexico businesses get involved in these efforts?
Yeah, Deborah, that's a great question, and thank you for being involved in the organization. First of all, we all know that if we develop a partnership, we can do more together. And that's the great example here is what we have done on the border. And I'm going to just pick a narrow little example because there's a lot more going on. But there are businesses called maquiladores on the Mexican side. That's a great example of where Mexico and the United States and Mexican businesses and United States businesses said, let's talk about what each of us do the best and how we can partner up to make sure that we move forward benefiting both countries. What you don't want in a relationship is one country to feel that they're the orphan and they're just being thrown some crumbs. You want them to feel, even though they may not be as developed as our country, as rich as our country, you want them to feel they're a full and equal partner. And that's, I think, very vital to moving forward. And we can do this in so many areas. Just to give you another example, when I was state attorney general. We have obviously 4 border states, and on the Mexican side, 6 border states. We used to get together every 6 months, and the meeting would alternate between Mexico and one of Mexico's states and one of the border states in the United States. So every 6 months, the actual principals, the attorneys general of these 10 states. And what we would do is talk about the problems that we were facing. And a little example, sometimes a Mexican national would commit a crime in the United States and flee to Mexico. The victims up here would feel horrible about that. They weren't getting any justice. And how can somebody do that? And isn't Mexico a partner of ours? Well, we ended up developing, as attorneys general on both sides, protocols so that you could actually get a prosecution. And it was done in cooperation. In the example I gave you, a Mexican national fleeing to Mexico, they actually took our law enforcement papers. Sometimes an agent would travel there. Other times they would send formal affidavits. They would hold a trial in Mexico. They would find guilt or not, and then they would perform a sentencing. And I've never seen such building of confidence in terms of both sides of the border getting results like that. Obviously, if you have a border where nothing's done on that front, imagine crimes being occurring on both sides and nobody does anything about them. And so here, the attorneys general at their level cooperated, developed protocols in order to bring some form of justice. Now, people can obviously argue, well, it wasn't the same as what would happen in the United States, and that's true, but some form of justice was able to be performed on both sides of the border. Thank you so much, Deborah. Really appreciate your involvement. And let me also thank Ambassador Lewis. Those were great remarks. I didn't realize we could do these Zooms so well on the road. I may have to start trying that. You know, you get your earphones on and you're cruising down the road and you're participating in a Zoom. I thought I noticed that he was in the passenger seat. I hope so, because I don't think driving.
It looked like it.
I don't think driving and doing a Zoom and trying to stay focused on the camera it would be a great idea for me anyway. For me.
For me either. So we have time for one last quick question from one of your constituents, and then I'm going to wrap it up with a closing question. So, and I'm going to mispronounce the name, Yori Morales, please, if you'll come up on your video. You're on mute, Yuri, if you.
Yes.
It's your mute. Oh, there you go.
Senator, thank you so much, and thank you for everything that you do for this beautiful state and country. And thank you so much, Carrie. With you guys do an amazing job. Yuridia Morales, and don't worry about pronouncing my name. Yuri is fine. I know it's hard to pronounce. And I'm the executive director with Global Ties ABQ. And Senator, right now we are suffering specifically in the area of international tourism. You know, we with our Global Ties ABQ, we have been in existence since 1963 as a volunteer organization, and we are actually under the State Department, the International Visitor Leadership Program. But also, you know, bringing international visitors, international students, as I'm sure that you're aware, you know, 3,000 international students that New Mexico receives every year. Just our organization itself, we received just last year 400 international visitors, emerging leaders that we bring, you know, people that, as you were mentioning, the foreign affairs, international relationships, how important they are. I came as an international student myself 14 years ago to this beautiful city. So I'm humble and honored to represent Albuquerque and the state of New Mexico in the US and in the world. So now with this huge economic impact by us now bringing international students, international visitors, Senator, what is your recommendation after the pandemic ends? How are we going to be promoting, encouraging international visitors, international students to come to Albuquerque and to come to New Mexico?
You bet. Yuridia, thank you so much for that question, and thank you for your involvement too. I really believe we have to do exactly what the point of your question is. We need to continue the relationship with countries around the world. It is a tremendous asset to us to have some of the best and the brightest from around the world come to the United States and learn. Some of them stay, some of them go home. It's never a loss. The examples that I would give, if someone comes here and really spends a period of time learning about the United States and learning in the United States, when they go home to their country, they're like an ambassador for us. And then they also understand enough about our country to be a vibrant part of the international economy. We know that our global economy does a lot for us, that we know there are problems with it, but we also know that as we move along, we can resolve some of those problems and move forward together. So I think we need to stay focused on this. I don't like the idea that we're hearing from this administration of saying, oh, we don't need any immigrants, we don't need international students, we don't need these visas where talented people come in their particular area. I don't think that's a very, very good approach. And just to give you one example, since we have a general on here and he knows this very well, many times when we train military people by our activities around the world, it's the military people that have been trained by the United States that work with each other across countries where there are crises that are able to settle things down. They're in the Middle East, sometimes Egypt, and Israeli military officials at the highest level, with the urging of the United States, have worked together to try to tamp down violence and try to do everything they can to bring peace to a situation that might blow out of control. And so this international engagement, Yuridia, is tremendously important. And so let's work with you. Please let my staff know specific suggestions. I know we've done a number of pieces of legislation, but we'd like to work on more. And probably, one of the best things we need to do is elect people at all levels of government that feel like we do and hold the values we do, believing it's important to have international students here, to have international exchanges. I'm seeing signs around my hometown community. If you want to house an exchange student, give us a call. Those kinds of things, I think, show that commitment and caring that we need to really focus on. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that. So we are running low on time, so I'm gonna close with a question. General Seip, I'm gonna start with you. You have one question. Senator Udall, I actually have two for you. And if you can make your answers brief so we can make sure to get everybody back on time. So we've talked about crises, from COVID-19 to climate change to China and competition. And it's really easy to focus on crises that are happening around the world and what's wrong. So I want to end on hope. So General Seip, my question to you is, what gives you hope that we can address this pandemic and some of the other issues that we've touched on today? And the same question to you, Senator Udall, but your second question is, as I mentioned, you will be leaving the Senate at the end of the year. You can look at the comments in the Q&A section and see that you will truly be missed amongst your constituents. But what advice would you give to your successor, the next person who's going to step into this role? What would you tell them, and how would you advise them to lead on these issues? So General Seip, I'll start with you.
So Carrie, I talk to a lot of organizations about what I think are successful organizations, and I think I could ramp that up to countries. There's three kinds of countries out there. There's countries that make things happen. There's countries that watch things happen. And there's countries out there that sit back and wonder what the hell just happened. I submit to you that the United States of America makes things happen. And we are a resilient country. We are a very agile country. We embrace change. That has served us very well in the past, and I firmly believe it will serve us in the future. And so whatever the new normal looks like out there, we're going to roll up our sleeves, we're going to put our shoulder into it, and we're going to get back to the work of diplomacy, development, and defense, and get back to where we were before this pandemic came to our shores. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, General. And
Yeah.
Senator?
Okay. On the hope front, and I'll try to keep this very short. What gives me hope is the activists that are out there. Some of them are people that have been activists their whole life. I see activists that are 60 and 70 years old. They've moved on from their jobs to retire. They're in a comfortable place, but they're out there trying to change things, reform things, make the world better. And then what really gives me hope is the activists that we're seeing, like John Lewis did in his era, that as teenagers and in their 20s, just on the front line, Black Lives Matter, international activists on climate change. People are getting energized, people are getting out there and doing it, and they should never forget. You know, Margaret Mead made the comment that I think it's important for people to remember. A small group of dedicated citizens changes the world, nothing else does. And so you can do this. And then the final thing, my best advice is every day as a US Senator, first of all, you're insulated from elections because you have a 6-year term. You can do what's right. And don't worry about the political consequences of a vote. Vote your conscience. Vote the things you really believe, because that's the way you get the respect of your constituents. And they know, the constituents that follow things in the political level know they're not going to get an elected official that agrees with everything they do. So I would just say, make sure and focus on those things. And I think Ben Ray Lujan's going to do a good job in that Senate seat.
Bipartisan organization.
Yeah,
Senator,
I understand.
Senator General, thank you both so much.
Not to be partisan in any way.
No worries at all. Senator General, thank you so much for joining us, and the rest of the great New Mexicans who joined us, both who asked questions and otherwise. And to close us out is the person who you all know very well, who heads up our efforts in New Mexico, my wonderful colleague, Troy Williams.
Thank you, Carrie. And thank you, Senator Udall, for joining us today, sharing both your time and your insight. Your continued support has been invaluable, and as we continue to tackle a number of global challenges, I can't say it enough how much we appreciate your steadfast leadership on these issues. You certainly leave large shoes to fill, so thank you, sir. Thank you to Lieutenant General Seip for this engaging conversation, especially at this pivotal moment for our country. We appreciate your service and continued support for development and diplomatic efforts. Thank you to Ambassador Delano Lewis, Yuri Morales, Debbie Moore, Deborah Inman, and all of our New Mexico Advisory Committee members and veterans for Smart Power who joined us today. We certainly appreciate your time and attention to these issues, and are glad that you joined us for this conversation to really thank Senator Udall. Thanking your congressperson and sharing your positions on these critical issues, how important they are to you, how important they are to your community, is crucial to moving the needle forward. So please be sure when you have a chance to reach out to your members of Congress, share the importance of keeping America's global leadership strong, because your voice is important and it certainly makes all the difference. Like Carrie said earlier, you all received the email from me, so please do stay in contact. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Let's stay connected. And be sure to follow us on Twitter for our updates and information about our upcoming events. And then one final thank you for joining us at this time and for your continued support. And until next time, please stay safe and be well. Thank y'all.